In this tutorial, I will show you how you can keep prompting the user for some input values, and as long as the input values are invalid, you're going to keep letting the user try again. And as soon as the user actually enters a valid input value, you're going to stop the repetition and let them continue with the program. Okay, that's actually very similar to the pattern that we illustrate in another tutorial video, which you should really check out, where in that video I illustrated to see how you can keep prompting the user just for input values until they want to quit. Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to show you something that's very similar, although the idea is a little bit different. Okay, so now let's just make sure to launch your Eclipse, and you have your CSE114 tutorial loops projects, and let's create a new Java class inside the loops package. Okay, you can say repeatedly prompt user for valid inputs. Okay, and then click on the main. Okay, so now let's we're going to read integers from the user and also prompt them to see if they want to continue or not. Actually, we're only going to read the integer value from the user for this tutorial. So let's still we're going to declare scanner. Input equals new scanner system.in. Okay, so let's just document what's the purpose of this tutorial here. Okay, so first of all, non-negative, which means either 0 or positive, values are considered valid. Okay. On the other hand, negative values are considered invalid. So keep prompting the user for a valid value. Okay, so this means that as long as the user enters an invalid value, we will let them try again. And as soon as the user enters a valid value, we will stop the repetitions. Okay, that's basically an overall picture of the exercise. Okay, let's see how we can do it. So we're going to use a boolean variable here. So we're going to use a loop to actually control the repetitions of the action. So each individual action is we're going to prompt the user for an integer value. So we say system.out.println. You'll say enter an integer. We can even say enter a non-negative integer value. And then let's say let's store that in a integer variable. Let's say n. It's assigned to input dot next int. Okay, so now, so this is read an integer value from the user, and now we can do something about it. Do something with the user entered value. But now let's say we do something very simple. We just echo that back. So you can say system.out.println. And here you would say you just entered plus n. Okay, so now we're going to keep repeating this until the user actually enters some non-negative value. So as long as the value is negative, that means it is invalid. We're going to let the user try again. So in order to do this, we have to wrap these actions into a while loop, because we simply don't know how many failures the user is going to make until they actually get their very first non-negative values out. Okay. So we're going to use a while loop, and we're going to use a boolean variable for the state condition. And let me just say that it is b for now. From another tutorial video, yeah, we actually learned that you should set this boolean variable to be true. Okay, so now you would say boolean b initially is true, and then we would say while b is the case. We're going to keep doing this. Okay, I'm going to fix the name in a moment to show you that you might actually set an initial value to be a different value, and it's only a matter of how you interpret the variable. We will see that. But for now, let's just be consistent with the another tutorial video. So we'll set b to be true initially, so it's guaranteed. We're going to enter the loop for at least once. Okay, let's cut this and paste that as the body of the while loop. Okay, so now, we're going to say somehow we have to set the the boolean variable b to be false as soon as the user enters something that is valid, right? So we're going to say if the integer n is larger than or equal to 0. So this means valid input. Otherwise, it's negative, invalid input. If it is valid input, that means we are done. we can simply just set the boolean variable to be false, so we can exit from the loop. Otherwise, it is invalid, so they should really keep trying. Okay, so b is assigned to be true, and we can also even print out something here. This is the l dot print line. You can say the number you just entered is an invalid number. Try again. Otherwise, we're going to do system.out.println. You can say n is a valid number. We are done. Okay, so now once we exit from the loop, so that means b is equal to true. Okay, so now we can simply say system.out.println. Okay, we can say bye. Okay, let's just run it to actually get a feel, and then I will show you how you can change the boolean variable name in a meaningful way. So let's launch the program here. If I simply say -1, you just enter -1. -1 is an invalid number. Try again. And if I say -2, invalid number. Try again. -3. And now, as soon as I say a positive number, it's going to say, well, you just enter 2. 2 is a valid number, so it's a valid input. So now we are done. And bye. Okay, so now this b here is not very meaningful, is it? So we better change that to some meaningful name. So let's see how we can do renaming in Eclipse. So the way to do that is choose the variable, select the variable here, and right click, go to refactor, and then rename. Okay, so now we're going to change the name in this little box over here. Okay, once we change that, every occurrence of b will be changed. So now think about what b really means. It means as long as the input is invalid. As long as the input is invalid, then we actually have to stay in the loop, right? So we're going to say user entered value is invalid. And initially, we simply assume it is the case. The user's enter value is invalid, so that we actually have to prompt them for another time, which is the first time. And then later on, when we actually set when n larger than or equal to 0 is actually true, that means it is valid. The input is actually valid, so user enter value is invalid should be false. So kind of the opposite. So that's kind of the the twist you have to think it through yourself. But this will also work. Let's try. Enter a non-negative integer value, if you say -1, okay, -2, okay, let's say if I say 2, then I'm done. Okay, so now basically we say that you can see the confusing bit is now that in the name we say invalid, but initially that's true. Okay, and this is invalid and we set it to false, right? That's a bit confusing here, but you just have to train your mind to actually get used to this kind of idea. But I can show you another way of doing this. So what about we rename this variable to be something else? How about that? And then I'll show you the second version. Okay, so what we have just shown so far, you can actually make sure you follow up to this point, and then you can feel free to make another. Let me just do. Let me show it to you actually. So I want to keep both versions. So now, put this into comments. I can say version 1. We interpret the truth of as so when this variable is actually true as the state condition of the while loop. Okay, so basically we mean that is true if the user has entered invalid inputs. Okay, just to show it to you. Okay, so now I would like to do a second version. Okay, in the second version there, let me just copy this comment here, and then let me write it down first. And we're going to use another boolean variable. So let's say version 2. So let's say user enter value is valid. Let's say. Okay, as so now we have to say. Let me just say something here first, and then I'll explain. The negation of the truth of. Okay, negation. This is the state condition of the while loop. So user enter value is valid is true if the user has entered valid input. You can that's kind of the symmetric way of version 1, but both versions will work. So let me just put both versions down. You can actually compare them and study them. Okay, let me copy this fragment here. I'm going to modify that as a second version. Okay, let me uncomment this. Okay, so now I'm going to rename this variable here. Okay, double click to select, and then right click, and then refactor, and then rename. Okay, so user enter value is valid rather than invalid. And initially, and this, if I simply leave it like that, then it wouldn't make much sense, because if you see this branch over here, when the input value is actually valid, you actually set this user enter value is invalid to be false. You know, that doesn't make sense. When this is valid input, then you should really set this to true rather than false, right? So if you it really depends on how you want to name your boolean variable. That's really my point. In both versions, in each version, I'm trying to show you here, you are naming your boolean variable for a particular interpretation. Okay, so now in this version 2 here, we're saying that if the user enter value is valid, variable is true, that means the value the user enter is really valid. In that case, you should not repeat anymore. So I would say initially that should be false, because we want to it's false, and then here we put a negation sign over here. So think about this. Because the initial value of this variable here is false, so not false is going to be true, and then we're guaranteed to actually stay in this loop for at least once. And now, if you and then here, when you actually get a valid input, you're going to set the variable to be true. So now it should make sense, because user enter value is valid is set to be true if you read a valid input. On the other hand, if it is invalid input, so you should set a boolean variable to be false. Okay, so basically we are flipping from true to false, and also the state condition by adding also flip the state condition by adding a negation operator. Okay, let me recap what the second version is about. So first of all, we actually declare a boolean variable here. So this boolean variable here is user enter value is valid. It's actually quite self-explanatory in the variable name itself. So this boolean variable is true if the user enter value is actually valid. Okay. Initially, we simply say the user enter input is not valid. That's why we set it to false. Because it is not valid, and the state condition says that as long as the user enter value is valid is not the case. Okay, so this expression here is saying that as long as the user enter value is valid is not the case, then we're going to stay in the loop. Okay, which means as long as the value of this variable here is false, because not false will give you true. As long as this variable here is false, then we have to remain in the loop. Otherwise, if as soon as this variable here becomes true, which is the case where we are trying to set the we are trying to set it to true, and upon the valid input value here, okay, then we can exit from the loop. Okay, so now we got two versions here. You should really try to understand both versions. Which version to use is completely up to you. You can see in version 1, the variable name is called user enter value is invalid. In the second version there is user enter value is valid. Apparently we got two completely the opposite interpretations of the variables here. That's why in one version, the initial value has to be true. And the state condition there is simply just the Boolean variable itself. On the other hand, on the second version there, the initial value of the Boolean variable is false. But now the state condition is the negation of that Boolean variable, just to be consistent with how we interpret this Boolean variable. And moreover, whenever you read the valid input in version 1, you have to set the Boolean variable to be false, to be consistent with that particular interpretation. And on the other hand, in version 2, if the input value is actually valid, you have to set that Boolean variable to be true. Again, to be consistent with the interpretation. Okay, so you should really study these two patterns carefully. Okay, and which version to use is completely up to you. Okay, but you need to understand both. Okay, stay watching.